there is leadership that has taken off, that is doing things that are very promising, that look like they're moving in the right direction. And in particular, in the East African community of which we are a part, or of which Kenya is a part, I'm extremely proud of the East African community. It continues to grow. This year, the Democratic Republic of Congo joined. There is currently talks to add Somalia to the East African community. We saw the other day President Ruto of Kenya visit Eritrea and abolish visa requirements between Kenya and Eritrea. And he also visited one of his first visits as when he was after inauguration as president was to Ethiopia, where he inaugurated the new Safaricom Ethiopia, as well as I forget what the other business, the other Kenyan business was. I forget if it was Equity Bank and Safaricom. It might just have been Safaricom, but anyway, there's a lot of businesses in Kenyan businesses in Ethiopia. In and that's what President Ruto was there to inaugurate. But in addition, to make sure that he was demonstrating to the world that any suggestions of sort of isolation of Ethiopia were not going to fly with Kenya, were not going to fly with President Ruto. And I'm especially encouraged and extremely proud that President Ruto made a state visit to Asmara immediately before coming to the United States for the so-called USA Africa Summit. Because where we need to be making alliances is with our neighbors. It is not with far off countries such as the United States. Our relationship with the United States, quite frankly, has never been beneficial to us Africans, and I cannot quite understand why we still continue to spend so much time looking outwards, looking westwards, or for that matter, even eastwards, rather than looking at each other as neighbors.
You mentioned earlier President William Ruto went to Eritrea, visited Eritrea, and I think it is an extremely significant move for him, as you stated. Can you touch upon the strategic importance as it relates to Kenya, Somalia, Eritrea, and Ethiopia? What that connection means, how that interplays?
Well, of course, it's extremely significant. It's extremely significant on a couple of levels. A, because, of course, the West has vilified and treated Isaias Afwerki with disdain. And so President Ruto paying a state visit to Asmara, to Isaias Afwerki, and being seen walking around with Isaias Afwerki is sort of saying it's no longer business as usual. We are going to do the things that are suitable for us, for our region, for our countries, and indeed having stronger ties with our neighbors, including Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, as well as, of course, continued relationships, which we already have with Uganda, Tanzania, as well as all of the other countries of the EAC, is important. And I think that what this portends is the possibility of a return to normalcy, or a return to the new status quo that had started developing when Abiy Ahmed had started forming alliances with, forming closer ties with Eritrea and Somalia. And that should continue. And I think that President Ruto being courted heavily by the West, as well as making those moves to indicate that he's at the same time, even while they court him, going to continue to do the things that he believes are best for Kenya and the region, is very positive. And I think that it gives a lot more room for Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki and MS, what's his name? Mohammed. I cannot remember his name right now. I'm not going to try to, the president of the current
Somalia,
president, yes, of Somalia.
Hassan.
Yes. It gives license to Hassan Sheikh Mohammed. It gives license to, I think it creates more room for the Horn to continue to go back to that arrangement that the Horn had started working on, of closer ties. And I think that that can only be a good thing, because of course we know how important the Horn is to Africa, to the whole East African region. And we also know that it is contested. That region, there is a contest, an almost silent, because it's not openly stated, right, that the West is competing for control of the waters of Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti. But their actions definitely show that they are heavily contesting. Djibouti alone has bases from China, from the United States, and militaries from right across the Western world and apparently the East, right there in Djibouti. So there's clear competition for control of that region, even though they do not state it. They do not openly come out and state the importance of it. They pretend and suggest that the West does, that their interest in that region is purely for peacekeeping, right? Um, Meanwhile, we see Al Shabaab and other troublemakers being funded from outside, and being very well funded, very well provided for. So it beggars the question, who is supplying these troublemakers with advanced weaponry, food, and continued operational costs? So it clearly, this region is extremely important to the world, and it being controlled by the region, by Africans, by the African countries that occupy the region, is a good thing. And that, I believe, is what Ruto's visit to Eritrea and strengthening of ties with the Horn portends and creates. It's a very exciting time for me.
The U.S. Africa summit has certain elements to it. Initially they said that they're not going to talk about the security, the competition with China and Russia, but uh, they were openly talking about how China and Russia are going to be destabilizing factors in Africa, and they were basically, telling Africans. They initially promised that they're not going to lecture Africans about who they're going to partner with, whether it's China or Russia, but that is openly what's happening, and connect that with Kenya, and if you can, talk about it a little more.
So, of course, the USA Africa summit was never about Africa, right? It was about the United States. It was about China. It was about countering the influence of China and Russia in Africa. By the way, uh, and the way they are doing that is not by actually countering the power of Russia and China in Africa, because they really can't, right? China and Russia are way too powerful, so they cannot curtail their power. So what they are really doing is threatening Africans, that if they interact with, that if they get too close to China, there will be consequences. So it really is a summit about carrots and sticks. And I think it's more sticks than carrots. It's about saying to Africans, look, we're going to give you $55 billion over the next 3 years in quote unquote so called aid. It's actually loans that are Shylockian in nature, very high interest rates. And it's $55 billion for 55 countries, so a billion each. When you contrast that with 68 billion spent on Ukraine alone this year, and counting, it's a drop in the bucket. Whereas in reality, the payments from that 55 billion will probably amount to 10 times more, 500 billion in repayments over the next 10 years or so. And all in the meanwhile, letting African leaders, letting Africans know that if you play around, if you get too close to China, if you get too close to the sky, you will melt and burn and fall to the ground.